Two young women are being walked out of Bunsen Lake Park right now by search and rescue crews. The pair got lost during a hike yesterday afternoon. Search and rescue crews are currently nearing the end of this 8-hour round-trip hike into the park. The women, in their early 20s, went for a hike between noon and 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, but they lost their way and used a cell phone to call for help at around 6 o'clock last night. A helicopter was used to find the pair, but it was too cloudy to do a drop-down rescue, so crews are instead hiking in to retrieve them. The pair are unprepared for the weather conditions, and their cell phone batteries are quickly dying because of the cold.
Well, up on the mountain right now, we were unable to get a helicopter in because there's a fog bank that's in there, and it looked like it had started to snow.
Are they prepared for this hike? What sort of...
I'd have to say that no, and they're definitely not designed or set up to handle a night outside.
Overseas, Russian flags are flying at Ukraine's naval headquarters in the Crimean port of Sevastopol today. This as pro-Russian forces took control of at least some of the base without armed resistance. It comes one day after Russia signed a treaty with local authorities to annex the region. It's the clearest sign so far that Russian soldiers and the so-called self-defense units of mainly unarmed volunteers who support them had begun to take control of Ukrainian military facilities across the Black Sea Peninsula. Shortly after the incident, Ukraine's acting defense minister said the country's forces would not withdraw from Crimea. There's a new development in the search and investigation of the missing Malaysia Airlines jetliner. Malaysia's defense minister says files were recently deleted from the home flight simulator belonging to the plane's pilot. He says investigators are trying to retrieve the files, which were deleted on February the 3rd, but adds the pilot is considered innocent until proven guilty of any wrongdoing. The flight, with 239 people on board, went missing March 8th after leaving Kuala Lumpur for Beijing. There is a much different feeling in downtown Seattle this morning, 24 hours after a fiery disaster in a busy part of the city. A news helicopter crashed near the Space Needle shortly after taking off from a helipad on KOMO TV's roof. The crash killed the pilot and a longtime serving cameraman with KOMO's news operation. A driver of a car was also seriously injured, spotted leaving his vehicle covered in flames. The chopper was being used temporarily while the station's regular chopper was being serviced. Witnesses heard the aircraft making strange noises right before it crashed.
Did I see what I think I saw? I know that there's a news station right here, but I wasn't thinking like, God, there's no way. So then when I had was looking down and I looked up, I was like, there's the helicopter falling that just crashed. So it wasn't real.
Seattle's mayor says the city will re-examine policies that allow helicopters to fly in and out of the downtown area. Transport Canada says rules north of the border are much more restrictive. One person is dead, another is in custody after an apparent shooting on Vancouver Island. It happened yesterday morning in a quiet neighborhood in Saanich, right near the Pathway Highway. Neighbors heard what sounded like at least one gunshot. Police responded to a 911 call, arriving to find the victim and the suspect. Their relation is unclear, but police say they were known to each other. So far, no charges have been laid. This was the scene at Burnaby at Kingsway and Royal Oak late last night when a pedestrian was struck. It happened at about 11 o'clock last night. The victim was rushed to hospital, is listed in stable condition. The driver did remain at the scene. Speed and road conditions are believed to be factors in the incident. Langley RCMP think the drug trade may have had something to do with violence in a church parking lot. The attack happened around 2:15 yesterday in Aldergrove. A 19-year-old man was airlifted to hospital after being stabbed in the back. The suspect hopped in his vehicle and took off. This usually busy McDonald's restaurant at Vancouver's main and terminal evacuated yesterday after someone apparently came into contact with chemicals in the washroom. The hazmat team was called to the scene. There's no word yet if the injuries were serious, but the restaurant was evacuated. More of the children of serial killer Robert Pickton's victims will now be eligible for compensation. Up to 98 family members will now be eligible to split a $4.9 million fund. Initially, just 13 people who launched legal action against 3 levels of government were awarded money. The fund is provided by the federal and provincial governments along with the City of Vancouver and amounts to about $50,000 per person. Canada has a new federal finance minister this morning. Prime Minister Stephen Harper has named Joe Oliver to the post. He moves into the finance portfolio from his former position as Natural Resources Minister. This move was widely expected and follows yesterday's sudden resignation of Jim Flaherty. After 8 years in the finance ministry position, the 73-year-old is leaving politics and returning to the private sector. Greg Rickford will take over the Natural Resources portfolio. A federal court judge is expected to rule later this week on whether to temporarily block new medical marijuana regulations that come into effect on April the 1st. Patients have been legally growing their own pot under the current law for about a dozen years. Under the new rules, only a selected number of commercial producers will be allowed to grow medical marijuana. A group of patients is asking a judge for an injunction to block the new law, saying it violates their rights because many users will be priced out of the market. The government says the new rules will prevent pot tainted with mold and other public safety concerns.
The new regulations force people to only buy from licensed producers, and we're saying that that puts these patients, especially those who can't afford it, but also those who want to control the quality of the strains and what they've been doing now for up to 12, 13 years under this program, so that they can continue to do that for themselves.
The Aquilinis have their hands in many business ventures, and those now include some big-name Vancouver restaurants. The Aquilini Investment Group has reached a deal to buy the Top Table Group. It includes 5 high-end restaurants, including Chin Chin, the Blue Water Cafe, and Araxi in Whistler. The Aquilinis, led by Managing Director Francesco, are best known for their real estate holdings and the ownership of the Vancouver Canucks. People who specialize in keeping our coastline clean are now being charged with a brand new project. The Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup is getting $270,000 to handle debris from the 2011 Japanese tsunami. The money comes from a $1 million grant from the Japanese government. The Shoreline Group will be able to use the money to reach remote locations they normally have trouble getting to, although there hasn't been as much debris reach British Columbia as expected.
It's estimated that the amount of debris that went into the ocean as a result of the tragic tsunami in Japan is 1/6 of what goes into the ocean every year. So although it's an important issue and we need to be prepared for the tsunami debris and to continue to monitor and help clean up, it's really, it's a drop in the bucket.
More than 1 million tons of tsunami debris is still believed to be floating in the Pacific Ocean. Smartphones can do all sorts of things, so it may come as a bit of a surprise that this is a Canadian first. 911 is now reachable by text message in southwestern BC. The service is only intended for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired. 911 texting will work on most smartphones, but only if the individual user registers with their wireless service provider.
It will be far greater than they've ever had access to before. So we're excited from that perspective that this new service will provide a substantial improvement for this particular community.
Again, just to reiterate, the service is not available to the general public unless you have speech or hearing problems. You are still expected to access 911 by voice.